Welcome to the Raj and Drew Show for entrepreneurs. And I'm excited about the topic today. I feel like I say that every time. I love what we're talking about, Raj. Is this not fun stuff?
Oh, this is great fun stuff, and it is so much valuable stuff for anybody who is paying attention to it.
Absolutely. And I love your perspective on it with your experience, and I'm learning every time. And so let's jump into it. So we are talking about the four disciplines of execution. Great book. Check it out if you haven't read it before. But the four disciplines of execution and how an entrepreneur can really leverage these disciplines, and also some extra information from some of the recent interactions you've had with clients. So I'm looking forward to that. So let me go ahead and give the four disciplines to the audience here, to the listeners, and then we're going to jump right in. So the four disciplines are, if you've never heard of them before, or you forgot, you read the book a long time ago, it's been out for a while. The four disciplines are this. Number one, you want to focus on wildly important, on what is wildly important. So your wildly important goal or initiative or objective. Number two, you want to act on lead measures. So separating lead measures from lag measures. We'll talk more about this. Number three, you want to keep a compelling scoreboard. So people got to see what it is they're doing. It makes sports more exciting when you have a scoreboard. If you didn't have a scoreboard, you wouldn't know, you wouldn't have all the emotions that you have. And so you want to have a scoreboard for your team so that they can know where they're at in pursuit of the goal. And then number four, you have to create a cadence of accountability. So creating a cadence of accountability. So Raj, I'm gonna toss it to you. Where do you want to start with this today?
So, Drew, the first thing I want to go back and give you some examples, especially from the small business point of view, entrepreneur-led companies, which might be stage one, two, three, four, five. So this is all the companies with less than 500 employees. What I
Mm-hmm.
have learned is the 4DX methodology is a great methodology, but it can be very good for established companies. But
Mm.
if you're looking at a small and a growing organization, there are certain fundamental groundwork they need to do. And if that foundation is there, they will benefit the most. And the interesting part of it is, I was talking and summarizing this with five different companies from five different countries just yesterday, analyzing all of those
Mm.
things. So this is right off the press. So what we have learned over the last 12 months implementing in small businesses was, number one, we need to have job descriptions,
Mm.
because most of the small businesses, they have a high level idea what they're doing because they're wearing multiple hats. But if you really want to go back and implement a 4DX, you really want to have some good job descriptions. And in my methodology, I call it a 3D job description. And the
Okay.
3D stands for is there are three to five. The first dimension of that are accountabilities. A job description should have what is this role accountable for. The second dimension is what are some of the tasks they need to do to accomplish those accountabilities. And the third piece of it is what are the key success measures for this. A good 3D job description with all three elements provides a lot of clarity for everybody who is working on that. So it will clarity around recruiting, clarity around promoting, clarity around execution.
Mm.
And once we have that, then you can go back and say, hey, how can I recruit the right talent? So we can do a psychometric analysis based on the job, and then you can start recruiting the people who are ideally suitable for the role. The second, the culture piece of it.
Well,
Every
let me
company has a culture.
yeah, let me stop you real quick. Pause
Sure.
you on that. So psychometric, maybe for listeners out there, maybe define what is a psychometric assessment? Is this kind of like a personality profile, or what are we talking about with that?
So in psychometric profile, what we have is a combination of behaviors, driving forces, and competencies.
Okay.
Because if you look at a person, they're made up of these three composers. What are some of the behaviors that they're very comfortable, that comes naturally to them? Why do they do the things they do? What is their driving force? What motivates them to do the things? And then what skills do they bring to the table, which are competencies? A
Mm.
combination of the three is called a psychometric profile. So every
Okay.
single job, you can go back and determine what is a profile for it. A simple example, basically, if you go back and look at a behavior, right? If you look at a salesperson who is very, very successful, one of the things is they have urgency as one of their behavior profile. The second is they're
Mm,
very, very competitive. The third piece of it is they're very, very versatile. They can move from one to different activity in a split second. So those things help salespeople to focus on the right thing, go after the right client, the right customer, whoever it is, and make things happen.
I
So
like
a
it.
combination of those three is going to be one of the key requirements. Once you have the job description, it is very easy to get those things.
Okay.
And once you have
So
that,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
So the second piece of it is now you have a culture, you have some cultural, you have your own values, you have your own purpose, you have your accountabilities and norms. Now you want to interview them and make sure they're a match with the culture piece of the company. So one is fit with the job, one is fit with the company. Now it might be a little more difficult to get some people, but once you have that, you're recruiting for the long term. So they're aligned in both ways. So they feel comfortable and people don't move if they're very comfortable with where they are. So that is the biggest piece that we need to focus on as a fundamental piece of it.
That's
And once
great.
they go
So
back and recruit the,
yeah, so you've
go ahead.
got the clarity, that you want to get for your employees. Then you've got the culture piece, which I think you're so right on how the culture piece, kind of like vision, it unites people, but it also divides. And the same thing is true, I believe, with culture, right? Your culture is going to be a great fit for some people, and for others, it's not going to be a great fit. They're looking for
Yes,
something different in culture. And so if you can get clear on that, then you're going to have, I would imagine, greater commitment with your team.
exactly, exactly. And once you recruit those people and you're bringing in, the third step is, are you really onboarding them in the right way? Just take some quality time, give them the company values, make sure they understand if that is a part of a function, part of a department, and the whole orientation and training should be so very well done so that once they finish that piece of it, they're very, very clear why they have been hired for, how they fit into the culture, how they fit into everything else. So this brings additional value to everybody else. And once you have that piece, the next piece of it is if it is a new employee, make sure they're very clear what are their expectations from a 30-day, 60-day, 90-day. It may not be always deliverable. It might be learning some new products. It might be learning new functions, new processes, standard operating procedures, whatever it is. Go back and define that in the 30, 60, 90 days. If it is an existing employee, every year, every quarter, every 6 months, make sure they clearly understand what is the company strategy and what are their goals and how are they aligned with that. So any company, all the small businesses I have seen who have done this for, the execution piece becomes very, very easy because now they're already aligned. They're very, very motivated in what they're doing. And now they're getting the 4DX process, which will accelerate the growth.
That's great. And with that final piece, the 30, 60, 90 day, that is so important because the employer will have expectations. The entrepreneur, right, is going to have expectations of this employee. But if you don't clearly articulate those expectations, then it's just a gamble. You might get what you're expecting, or you might not. And that gap between your expectation and the reality, that's called disappointment. And so if you want
Yes.
to avoid being disappointed, then do that 30, 60, 90, and different types of people. Some people are perfectly fine in the ambiguity, right? In being in that space where they
Yes.
just are figuring it out and they're going to make it happen. But you have a large portion of the population, 65, 70%, maybe even of the population, that they want very clear lane lines so that they can perform as expected. That's their goal. They want to perform as expected. And so if you don't give a 30, 60, 90, that person, if they're more proactive, they're probably going to be asking you a lot of questions so that they can get those questions answered. If they're not very proactive, then they might be wasting a lot of time because they don't know exactly
Yes.
what they're supposed to be doing. So that is such an important foundation. Thank you for sharing those foundational pieces with us, because I think it's vital for an entrepreneur to know you go out, you have this dream, you have this vision to start this business, but there are so many roadblocks along the way. And so that what you're saying is that is the foundation for our listeners, for the entrepreneurs out there. That's the foundation
Yes.
that you need to lay before you kind of begin the process of the 4DX, 4 disciplines of execution outline. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, that is perfectly the way you mentioned it. Exactly. The foundation is laid, the building can be as big as what you want it to be.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so let's jump into it then. These 4 disciplines. So how do we identify? How can an entrepreneur identify a wildly important goal?
So, Drew, one of the things I want to go back and identify a little bit on the execution piece of it. There are two
Okay.
different execution strategies. Before we get into the goals, I really want to bring this to bear. There are certain executions that can be done what we call the stroke of a pen. So what it
Okay.
means like is if let us say the entrepreneur wants to go back and really invest capital on buying a new machine,
Hmm.
he can just stroke of a pen, write a check or get a loan and he's done with it.
Yeah.
Change a policy, strategic acquisition. Those are all things that can be very easily done, and you really don't need a lot of change in behavioral piece of it.
Okay.
But there are certain execution strategies that need a change in behavior. And whatever we talk about today, that is very important from a behavioral change perspective. Any execution that requires a change in behavior, this is the best way to go back and do it.
Okay.
If we are doing a capital investment, you don't need execution there. I just want to clarify that piece of it.
Yeah. So what's an example for an entrepreneur of a behavior changing initiative that would require this process in execution? What's an example of something like that?
So one of my client used this process for improving customer experience, because for
Okay.
improving customer experience, all the people supporting need to start looking at things very differently.
Mm,
Or in my manufacturing clients, if you go back and look at it, we bought a new automation line. So there are a lot of things that we need to change. So process adoption has to be there. That is a behavioral change.
okay.
If we go back and say, hey, we are having problems, I need to go back and provide higher quality services, then there is a behavioral change to go back and provide superior quality products. So each one of those things have to be changed. Let us say if you have a client who's saying, hey, your response is very slow, then we need to get
Hmm.
an initiative and say, hey, we need to make it faster, better. Then there is a behavioral change with it. So these are all different examples where when you need to start implementing, people need to get out of their comfort zone and change their behaviors to go back and get the results. That is where these 4 disciplines of execution really, really is very impactful.
So pretty much after you have more than one employee, you gotta begin implementing this, right? There's going to be behavior change all across the board.
Yes.
And that's why in the stages
Yes.
of growth series that we did prior to this, in those 7 stages, the the higher the stage, um, the complication comes with more people, and that's what we
Exactly.
clearly said over
Exactly.
and over and over again. It's the stages come with the amount of people that you have in your organization, because that's where the challenges come. You have more people that you have to change their behavior, more people that you have to cast a vision to, and have them buy in and implement whatever it is you're trying to do. So that's perfect. That makes perfect sense. Thank you for clarifying the difference between kind of making an executive decision for a capital investment versus behavior change with your team. That's that's good.
Yes.
So now that's a good foundation for that, on how we identify wildly important goals, because um, now we're talking about a wildly important goal that has to do with behavior change within your organization.
Yes. So one of the things about the company's strategic planning, and a
Okay.
lot of people, they might not call it strategic planning, but everybody has a plan. If you look at even one-person company versus 30 people or 50 people or an entrepreneur, they always have something in their mind that they need to execute.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to go back and draw that out of them and put them on a piece of paper and really understand everything that they want to go back and accomplish. Let me give you an example. I was working with somebody 4 weeks ago. When I
Okay.
went back and looked at it, they're almost like 22 different goals they had.
Mm.
22 different goals. And I could go back, and when I spent and spoke to some of the people, they were so frustrated with it. But if you really look at it, there are two different goals within that. One is what we call is day-to-day goals, something that has to be done. And if you
Mm.
look at the book, and what it says is we call it the whirlwind.
Mm-hmm.
Those are activities that has to be done, has to be there. But there are certain things which are very unique and very, very specific that makes a huge difference for the business. And that is where you need to go back. So if you look at all the 22, we went back and looked at it, and there were only 4 that was very, very important.
Okay.
So we picked and analyzed everything else to reach their 3-year goals and 1-year vision piece of it. They had to work on 4, and that's how they finalized 4 WIGs as a
Mm.
company. So they need to really go back and understand what is absolutely very important. Because the whirlwind always happens and people are looking at it. And let me give an example for helping people understand that. So let us go back and look at it and say, I want to grow my business by 50%.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way I can grow is if I go back and expand in the next geographic area. So I'll take your area, Drew. So basically, you're looking at Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the market is very saturated. At the most, you can get a few percentage points higher or lower. But your ambition is still to grow by 50%. So you go back and say, you know what? I need to expand, and the market is in McKinney. McKinney is different. It is an hour and a half away. It's a different demographic and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever you're doing in Dallas, that will be part of your process. You'll be doing it. But whatever you do in McKinney has to be a wildly important goal, and you need to focus on that. If you don't do that, because it is a new opportunity, it is a new geographic location, you need to do a lot of things differently. So the
Yeah.
McKinney piece of it becomes a wildly important goal for you, because that is
Okay.
getting you the extra 30, 40% growth.
Gotcha.
So you're doing all your regular things in Dallas. That is the difference between a regular whirlwind goal versus a wildly important goal.
Yeah.
Hopefully that
Yeah.
clarifies.
It does. It does. And if you think about, we all have cell phones, right? So,
Yes.
if you're making cell phones, then your whirlwind, your day to day, would be the manufacturing process of making the phones. Um, but if you're having a problem losing people all the time, then maybe a wildly important goal might be increasing retention with your team,
Yes.
and figuring out how we do that, putting a plan together for how we do that, and refining that. And that would be your wildly important goal, or your WIG. That's what we call it in the book, right? Your WIG, your wildly
Yes.
important goal. And so often, I think people tend to, like you said, they focus on, just the phone and making the phone faster, or just doing it better, or just really the day to day, right? The day to day problems that they have, instead of what's going to, how I envision it in my head, what's going to move the organization forward, what's going to help us
Yes.
outside of, when I'm doing leadership training, every time at the end of training, I say, what intentional leadership action are you going to take between now and the next time we meet? It's kind of like a little mini wig, right? Because it's not,
Yes.
you're going to have to do all kinds of leadership's actions that are just going to come up. You're going to have conversations. You're going to have to do this, that, and the other. But what can you do intentionally? Maybe you begin mentoring a person, a high potential on your team, something like that, that is extra outside of, but it's going to prepare you for opportunities in the future. And so that would be kind of a mini example of a wig that an individual could take. So it's outside. Clearly, you said that it's outside of the day to day, and I want people to get that. That's the whirlwind. The
Yes.
whirlwind's going to happen. Every organization has the day to day. The ones that grow figure out how to do things outside of the day to day in order to grow, whether that's opening up a new market, or it is doing something to change your culture in the organization, customer service, as you mentioned earlier, retaining your talent. What kind of program or process are you going to put in place outside of the day to day that's going to meet whatever initiative you have?
Yes. So two things from the discipline one, which I tell people is do not have too many WIGs. So what at least
Mm,
the data from the book and what I have learned from my customers is generally if you have 2 to 3 WIGs, you accomplish all of those things.
mm,
If you have about 4, 5 to 10 WIGs, you only accomplish 1 or 2. And when you have 11 to 20 WIGs, like the example I was talking about, 0 got done.
mm-hmm.
So just imagine I have 20 WIGs identified, I have 0 closed. Whereas I have 2 to 3, now your focus is razor focused, you get the 2 to 3 done. So look at it from that perspective. And anybody in the team, it can be the entrepreneur, it can be the team, it can be a manager, individual, they should never be focused on more than 1 or 2 weeks maximum.
Mm.
If they have something very important at a team level, company level, at any given time, anybody in the organization should not be working more than 1 or 2. And in my opinion, small businesses, 1. I don't even go for the second one. Some bigger organization, 2 are okay. But all my experiences, do 1 at a time, do it very well, close it. You have a huge impact on the business, then move on to the next one.
That's
Those 2 are
good. So,
fundamentally very important for WIGs.
yeah. So, how do I, as an entrepreneur, how do I prioritize? How do I figure out what are the most important things? Do I do an 80-20 and kind of think what are the 20%, or if you have 10, let's say someone has a list of 10 items, do they just identify
Mhm.
what 2 will have the greatest impact on their goal, and those are the 2 they go after? Or how do you kind of walk an entrepreneur through that process, or someone listening, they don't have a consultant, they don't have a coach that can help them through this process? What are some ways that the listeners right now could identify and prioritize a wildly important goal?
So I'll give you an example. I can't give you all the 10 issues on the table, but I was working with a client a couple of weeks ago. So the number one thing was cash flow. They had
Mm,
operational issues. They're not able to deliver the product on time. They're going and having some quality issues. All of those are very critical. But if you look at the 10, number one is cash flow. If there is no
yeah.
cash flow, basically you're cutting the oxygen for the company. Boom. Basically, there is no life left.
Yeah.
So that becomes a weak. The other thing, somebody can be delegated, somebody can be working on it. But if you look at the senior leader, the topmost, basically we are working on that number one. So that is what it is. If you're looking at a stage 2 company, as an example, you have 11 to 20 employees, right? So one of
Mm-hmm.
the biggest part of it is you need to be selling 80% of the time. So stage 2, when the company is growing, you're hiring people and you're growing and you're validating your product or services. So in a situation like that, if you're not focused on selling 80% of the time, then your whole survival of the business enterprise is at risk.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, that becomes your number one priority. So each time you look at your business, what is that very, very critical piece of it? Let us take a stage 4 company, which is a professional company. You bring in a lot of good, experienced people into the company. You have almost up to 50, 55 employees. So here, your number one priority is establishing and defining processes. Because you have some great experienced people, but if there are no processes, 55 people are running around with like a head cut off, and nobody
Mm-hmm.
can get anything done.
Yeah.
Productivity suffers, profits suffer, your business model will fail. So there, that becomes a priority.
Mm-hmm.
Hope you're getting an idea about how to go back and start prioritizing things.
That's good. That's good. So as we kind of transition here into lead measures, this is, I think, what every entrepreneur will probably say. This is what challenges me in the entrepreneurial journey is, how do I identify lead measures? I don't have a track record, right? I don't have all this data to reflect on and determine what, input X gets me output Y, right? I don't have that data yet. How can an entrepreneur identify lead measures in those early stages?
So the early stages, the biggest part of it is get clarity around your output, which is your WIG, right? So generally,
Mm-hmm.
the format we always say is my WIG, I want it to be quantitative, numerical value there. So let us
Yeah.
say I'm going to talk about sales as an example. I am selling X number of products per week, as an example.
Okay.
So the new WIG would be is from X, I need to go to Y per week. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing 10 today. I want to go back. My target is 50% growth. I need to go to 15. That is what. So 10 to 15 per week by so and so
Okay.
date. That is the quantitative output or the WIG. Now we need to go back and look at it from an input perspective. So let me give you a slight definition for a lead measure. Whenever we're
Okay.
talking about lead measure, there are two things we need to pay attention to. That is something we can influence. We can make things happen. Number one. Two, is it aligned with the output? Can it predict the outcome of it?
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example of weight loss because it's very easy for everybody to understand, right? If you look at a
Mm-hmm.
weight loss piece of it, AMA, American Medical Association, has said if you lose or consume 3,500 calories less, then you lose a pound. So
Okay.
3,500 calories is the magic number. So how do I, if I want to lose 1 pound a week, there are so many different ways I can do it. You know what? I can go back and say, you know what? I'm going to consume 500 calories less every day. And in 1 week, basically 3,500. So I lose a pound. Or somebody will say, you know what? I love my food. So I keep continuing eating. But you know what? I will exercise so that I burn 500 extra calories every day. And they will accomplish the same goal as well. And if you look at it, both those things, the person is able to influence that. They're able to
Mm.
influence how much they exercise or how much they want to eat. Or somebody might come back and say, you know what? I will sacrifice a little bit on my food and I will exercise a little more.
Yeah.
And that combination can work too. There you see, if I take 3,500 calories less, I lose a pound, which is the output I'm looking for. So I can influence the output and I can control how much I eat or how much I exercise. So
Yeah.
that is what a lead measure is. So sometimes in your stage, if you're new, you go back and take a best guess as to what will predict. Like if you look at a salespeople, right? There are at least 5 or 6 different steps in a sales process.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the 6 steps process, at least in my business, I know if I can go back and spend time with them on a Zoom call or in person, my probability of success is very, very high.
Mm.
And I push very hard for Zoom meetings or in person meetings because I can influence that. I can keep on talking to people. Then people might say, okay, Raju, they can say yes or no. I said, if I have a target of 10 people, then I need to make 10 calls or I need to make 100 calls. But the goal is I need to have 10 meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the influence. I need to keep on working on that piece of it. And
Okay.
based on historical data, if I do 10, I am closing 3 of those. So I'm getting the 30% growth I'm looking for.
Mm.
For somebody else, it might be a slightly different metric. It might be like, you know what? Every 10 product demos, I will close 3.
Yeah.
So for me, it is meetings. For somebody else, based on their product or service, it can be demos. For somebody else, it can be basically a 30 minutes free coaching as a sample. So every
Yeah.
person I give a coaching sample, I might get somebody. So each
Mm-hmm.
product, each one, they got to go back and look at it from that perspective.
Yeah.
But the number one is we can influence that. Number two, it can predict the outcome.
Mm. That's good. And even another practical example might be um, with your example of going from 50% growth, selling 10 products to selling 15. It might
Yes,
be that you make 100 phone calls a day and you're able to sell 10 products a week. Well, then maybe if you do 150 phone calls a day, you can get that 50% extra. And so that
exactly.
would be a guess, right? That would be another guess where you could say, hey, if I can up this to 150 calls, then I have a chance at growing by 50% in my sales. And so that would be just another simple example of what you could do for a lead measure that's quantitative as well. So okay, that's good.
And Drew,
That's
let
good.
me
I
add
think
something value to that. So,
yeah.
Drew, let me add one value to that, which will be very important for entrepreneurs. So let us say this entrepreneur has 3 salespeople. Two
Hmm.
people are making 150 and they're closing 50% higher, but the third person is not doing it. Now what? So to going back to your foundation, were they a right fit for selling?
Mm.
Was there really, see, some people are built for sales, some people are not built for sales. That is
Yeah.
human nature. So that is the first piece of it we want to check. The second piece of it, were they really trained and were they comfortable with everything that is? They understand the processes, they understand everything else. And third, are they very clear about the goals and the accomplishments they need to do? So that is the fundamental foundation. You pick one of those things and see where they are. And then you might say, you know what, this person was not properly trained, or the trainer was absent and this person missed the training. Something might come up, then you go back and fill in the gaps. That is where the cadence and the accountability comes into picture. So the biggest piece of all of this to work is discipline. They need to follow
Mm.
those 4 steps, and they need to do that very, very rigorously. If they can do that, once they start going and doing what I call basically trial and error, you can always look at the errors, learn from it, and start fixing it.
Yeah. That's good. Good example there. So with scoreboarding, when it comes to scoreboarding for entrepreneurs,
Yes.
I mean, we have a version of this in the strategic planning process. We have the roadmap, right? Which is a form of a scoreboard where it's a snapshot. You can see what's going on. Now, that doesn't count. It's not interactive. What are some creative ways that you've seen entrepreneurs create a scoreboard for their organization? Is it a digital dashboard? Is it the whole thermometer on the wall type thing? What are some ways that we can get that scoreboard going?
See, people make this very complicated, Drew. Make it simple for people to see if they can measure the input and the output. That's all I would say.
Mm.
So if I let me take the example of a weight loss. It can be a simple graph Monday to Sunday and say basically on the top, how many calories did I burn? How much calories did I take? That's all it is. And it can
Mm.
be an Excel spreadsheet if somebody likes it. It can be a beautiful pie chart if you want to. So I go back and tell people is what works with you. Make it simple, but make it visible. For me, the visual piece of it is the most important piece of it. It's like our car dashboard, right? At any
Hmm.
glance, you can see your dashboard and you can see everything. How much fuel I have, what speed I have, what is the RPM I'm running, how is my engine temperature. All of those are there, right? So we need to make it
Yeah.
simple enough like that, visual piece of it. But the biggest part of it is from my GE philosophy. I always tell people what get measured, get done.
Mm.
So in GE, that was the philosophy. You want something to be done, make sure it is being measured, and you tell them that is very important.
Yeah.
Like 94, 95, basically GE was big on Six Sigma. They just implemented it, but there was not much traction because everything was so new. You know what Jack Welch did? He said 50% of the bonuses and stock options would go to only people who worked on Six Sigma.
Wow.
If you don't have a Six Sigma project, 50% of the bonus will not be given. Guess what? There is so much of traction and everything else. And in 18 to 24 months, the whole Six Sigma changed in GE.
I bet. My
And that is the
goodness.
power of measurement. So that is what people need to go back and say, whatever it is important, if it is important enough, you're putting it into the 4DX process, create some sort of a scorecard. Don't go
Yeah.
for sophistication. And now, thanks to the technology and the software we have, there's so many beautiful softwares with minimum you can create all sides of charts.
Hmm.
But if nothing else, put a simple picture there. A thermometer, like you said, if it is a thermometer, that's fine. Just put a
Yeah.
picture and very easily you can update it in Microsoft Excel or something to show it on a screen.
Yeah, and in a regular, I know we're going to talk about cadence of accountability, but part of that accountability piece is just holding yourself as the entrepreneur, as the leader of the organization, to regularly putting that scoreboard in front of your team and regularly updating that scoreboard because we've got to make sure that that's part of our responsibility. What I found in organizations is many times the vision, and you could say the vision or the goal, right? The goals that we have in an organization that we set, we bring Raj in, they bring me in, and they do a strategic planning session, and then they just put it on the shelf and they never talk about it again. When that happens, strategic plans aren't magic. You're not gonna magically hit your
Yes.
goals because you spent time and money at the front of the year putting together a plan. You've got to work that plan, and your team has to see where they're making advancements in the organization. Going back to the sports thing again, right? You've got in football. I know you're a big New England Patriots fan, and I'm a fan of the
Yes.
Cowboys by default because we just have to be if you're in Dallas. But anyways, so you have the chains. The chains move, right? You get a first down. The chains move, right? That's a
Yes.
scorecard. That's a small scorecard. That doesn't mean that we've gotten a touchdown, but it shows us that we're making progress. And the
Yes.
clock tells us, hey, if we're trying to run out the clock, we're doing things, and we can see that clock going down, and we go, okay, we still have our lead, and we're running down the clock. If we can get one more touchdown, we're probably pretty good. We're safe, right? And so having that scorecard in front of you helps you make decisions in the moment on, hey, do I need to stay and just try to make a few more phone calls, or maybe if I do 10 more phone calls, I'll get that meeting, that in-person meeting or that demo meeting. And so it's going to help people in the moment make decisions, because if you're just looking at, this is what we finished, I think about the government, and I think about the numbers that come out, and if we wonder why our government just, all governments just kind of don't work very well. Well, look at the data. You're getting financial data a month or 2 months sometimes late. You're getting employment jobs numbers that are a month late, and they aren't even good. They have to totally go back and adjust them because they aren't even good numbers, right? That's way lag
Yes.
measures, right? Super lag measures. And there's nothing you can do about that. That's in the past. There's nothing you
Exactly.
can change about it.
Yes.
And so having that scorecard or that scoreboard that you can actively see, you can understand where you're at, you can know where you're going and where you're at in the process, is going to motivate, it's going to challenge, it's going to create accountability. And I think it's going to create momentum in the organization as well.
Yes. Yes. And just to highlight one of the things you were just mentioning is the scoreboards. You can have one for lag metric, but the most important for a WIG perspective and for 4DX is a dashboard for the lead metric. I just want to make sure that people understand that it is not for the WIG. The WIG can be there because WIG is the lag metric, but we need to go back and look at it from a lead metric.
Yes.
So to our end example, 100 calls versus 150 calls, right? So I'm not making a note of or a dashboard of how much would be closed. Did we close 10 deals or 15 deals? That is good. That is there because that metric is a result of something we do. We want to monitor that. That is great for reporting purposes. But for really execution and the discipline and productivity perspective, we need to measure the input variable, which is the number of calls. So that is the two differences. A lot of people get confused between the lag dashboards for lag metrics versus lead metrics.
That's
so
good.
In this particular situation, the lead metrics are the number one and the most important.
Great clarification there. Great clarification. All right. So cadence of accountability. So when it comes to accountability with an entrepreneur, what do we do, and how do we really implement this cadence of accountability? Is this just meetings that we hold people accountable? Is this holding people accountable to the scoreboard? Kind of what does a cadence of accountability mean, and how do we do that as an entrepreneur?
So basically, when you go back and have cadence of accountability, that is to bring discipline to everything else. Remember, I was talking about whatever we are talking about here, we are talking about behavioral change. And how do you bring the behavioral change? That is through discipline. And that's the reason why these meetings are so important. So if you really look at a WIG meeting, this is what we call a cadence of accountability for a WIG meeting. We only talk about wildly important goals and the input or the lead metrics for that. So if you look at a typical meeting, they're generally no more than 30 minutes.
Okay.
It doesn't matter who it is. If it is more than 30 minutes, you're going to lose people. And you're only looking at three things. Hey, last week, this is what my commitment was, and this is what it is. So I promised myself that I would make 150 calls. I only made 132. This is the reason why. But this week, I am planning to do 180. That's all it is. Basically, last week, promised 150. I did 130. That is the updated dashboard. And then next week, I'm planning to make 180 to cover last week's 30. And done. That is 2 to 3 minutes and no more than that. So each one of them is focusing on that piece of it. Very,
Okay.
very simple. That is not for problem solving. The manager should not go back and say, hey, why didn't you make those 20 calls? Let us problem solve, diagnostic. All of that is out of the meeting. This is just to hold them accountable and make a commitment saying that, are you doing this? Do you promise this? Are you keeping up your promise in front of your peers, your front of in the group? Because if
Yeah.
I am one of the slackers, I can't go every week and say, sorry, I didn't do, sorry, I didn't do, because
Hmm.
I'm a human being. Everybody's there. So what it is brings a lot of accountability and peer pressure for the good of the team. And that's the reason why the discipline piece of it. If somebody wants to slack off, they don't like the change, they can't hide. Here, you are exposed. Every week, you're coming and telling what exactly happened. But for this WIG meetings, there are a few guidelines they need to do. If not, they will be really, really in trouble. Because I've
Okay.
seen companies which become problem solving meetings and disciplinary meetings and everything, and they become 2 hours. Then they lose their focus. Number
Mm.
one, never go back longer than 30 minutes max. If there are more people, then divide that into 2 meetings. See, you can almost have 15 people and everybody giving a 2 minute because they're answering 3 questions. Hey, I was planning to do 150, I did 130. This is my dashboard. Next week, I'm doing 180. Done. That is less than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Second person, any of these meetings, when you call it a big meeting, let it be like that. It is only discussing about 4DX. You're not talking about anything else. And the other piece of it, like the leader or the entrepreneur or whoever it is, they're very busy people. So most of the time they try to say, hey, I'm busy. Let us change this. And I tell them, all my clients, I tell them, if you are busy, that is fine. You have a designated person and that person will run, do the meeting, they'll give you an update. So the meeting time and venue never changes.
That's good.
The only time it changes is if it is falling on a national holiday or something like that, that we can't avoid it. But because the entrepreneur is not there, one manager is not there, one employee, no. If let us say I'm a salesperson, I can't do it, give it to the manager beforehand or send one of your colleagues and say, hey, can you share my information? I mean,
Yeah.
things happen. People are busy, people are on vacation, there are a lot of things. But the discipline and the rhythm keeps on going. That is the most important. And the purpose is to exchange information, dashboards, and hold participants accountable for their actions. That is the where behavior change I was talking about. This is
Yeah.
to hold them accountable for the action items. So
That's
never
powerful.
discuss other. Yeah, that is very, very important. If these 4 or 5 bullets are maintained and disciplined, you know what? The meetings are a big success. So each one of them has to focus on that. They need to make sure that these are part of their cadence meetings. If not, they will be in trouble.
Yeah, the discipline of making sure that that meeting almost stays sacred, that it's just for this purpose,
Yes.
that is a huge component of that cadence of accountability. And that's people are going to tempt you to derail them every time. Every time there's going to
Yes.
be, well, since we're all here, let me go ahead. No, we can do that another time.
Now,
Well, let me,
exactly.
I didn't hit my numbers because no, we don't need, it's okay. We don't need that.
We'll
We
take it
just
offline.
need a
We'll
report.
take it
Yeah,
offline.
take it offline. So I love that. I love that. Well, here we've been talking about this. I think there's so much good information, and I love that it's specific to the entrepreneur and the challenges that the entrepreneurs face, because the book really was written for larger companies, and that's it's a great process. But you had some foundational stuff that you gave us that the entrepreneur specifically needs to think about on the front end. If you kind of glazed over those or weren't really paying attention on the front end, I encourage people to go back and listen to those foundational items you said on the front end that an entrepreneur needs to think about before jumping into 40x. But put a bow on this thing, summarize it for us. Tell us, are there any other steps that maybe an entrepreneur needs to think about as it relates to 40x?
So this is my vocabulary and my language based on my experiences, Drew. So basically, I call it principles of execution focused leadership. There are 6 principles that I have come up with based on all of my experiences. So when we're doing the 4DX, one of the first thing I tell the leader or team leader or the entrepreneur, whoever is the leader for that organization, right? The first question they need to ask is, do we all know what is most important for us? The wildly important goal. Do we all agree on that piece of it? The second piece I tell them is that leadership is commitment. Do we believe in the goals and do we want to achieve them? Do we believe and do we want to achieve them? And the third piece of it is translation to action. Do we know what we have to do to achieve these goals? And the fourth piece of it is enabling sponsorship. The leadership is making a commitment saying that, guys, do we have any barriers? How can I help eliminate some of the barriers for you to go back and make things happen? That is again leadership, right? And the fifth point is synergy. Do we work very effectively together to improve our ability to achieve these results? This is all about the team dynamics and the teamwork and everything else. And the last but not the least is accountability. Are we reporting our results to one another on a regular basis so that everybody is holding their piece of the puzzle, or they're responsible for what they promised? So if you look at these six things, that is what I call execution focused leadership. If each one of the entrepreneurs, project leaders, team leaders, department managers, whoever at whatever level they're doing it, they constantly visit these six questions, I think the execution will be much, much, much better.
That's fantastic. I love it. I love that you brought that leadership perspective in and put a bow on it for us today. That was fantastic, Raj. So much value. Thank you for sharing that and just giving us some great insights on your experience with the 4 disciplines of execution. Awesome. Okay. Well, that is an episode, and that's a good one. I'm going to listen back to that one again so that I can capture all the good stuff in there. Thank you so much, Raj, and it's been a blast. Thank you all for listening, and give us a like. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast and share it with a friend. Share it on social media. If you have some entrepreneurial friends, share the value with them. Let them get the benefit from this, because this is very important stuff, real life stuff from working with entrepreneurs, working with leaders and organizations. And we're just passing on this value to you. So if you could do that for us, we'd really appreciate it. With that, Raj, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you so much. And I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.
Oh, thank you very much, Drew. It was fantastic. It was great sharing the information and all these experiences.